afternoon, all. I'm here to introduce Bruce Chadbourne to our Rotary Club. Bruce is retired, currently living in Cornwall Manor, and that's where I met him and heard his wonderful presentation that you'll hear here in a little bit. Bruce served at the GE Aerospace, Lockheed Martin, and BAE Systems on various naval electronic systems. His biggest achievement was working with a team that won the Navy's Seawolf submarine program. Bruce went on then to gain certifications in project, program, and portfolio management. He left the aerospace industry to become a business trainer and consultant through Boston University, and he served on for various business and government organizations around the country for 16 years before he retired. Bruce spent a lifetime in the bivocational ministry. His passion for Christian ministry started by serving elderly, beginning as an Eagle Scout, and later by helping in various church activities. He continued his Christian ministries by working towards his Master of Divinity degree and by serving in many church leadership positions. Bruce presently serves on the board of directors of the Lebanon Rescue Mission. He is also an active historian, writing articles for the online Elizabethtown.com. And Bruce and his wife continue to serve in the senior care and hospice facilities at Cornwall Manor. So let's please give a huge Rotary welcome for Bruce.
Thank you. I'm actually going to stand close to the notes that I can see just to keep me on track. I was curious how many happy dollars Steve might be assessed if I go over 2 hours in my presentation.
1,000.
Okay, it'll be shorter than that. I gave this presentation to your Steve's Church, St. Andrew's Presbyterian, and that's why it says May. I apologize for not updating the title slide there. But I first given this presentation a few years ago at a retirement community in Florida. It was the occasion of Veterans Day or something like that, and I saw an opportunity to tell one of my the stories from my time of service. And then in January, Jimmy Carter had just passed away at close to 100 years of age, and it seemed like a good time to update the presentation. Now it seems to be drawing a few more rounds of interest here. So I served in the peacetime Navy from 1976 to 1983 and had some interesting assignments. And this one, if I said Operation Eagle Claw and you didn't see anything else on the slide earlier, would you know what that was? Such as the peacetime Navy, right? Well, back in late 1979, the U.S. Embassy employees in Iran were taken hostage during Jimmy Carter's presidency, and there was a number of months of anguish over how to deal with that. And it turned out we were part of the answer. I was on station out there at that time. And to tell stories about Navy service, it might be true for other military, but Navy in particular, we like to say we tell sea stories. If you can put up with that, that's great. The other thing is you might know, or you might get from me, that Navy guys are proud of their ship, no matter how old and rusty or tiny it is bouncing around on a wave. So I want to tell a little bit of that, but then get into the story of Operation Eagle Claw. And it's particularly timely with Carter's passing, although it's now over about 6 months ago, that his life and service inspired mine. And that's why there's a story that I want to tell. The 70s were turbulent years for the country. You might, if you can think back, I know there's some that said they're not quite that old, but in the 70s we were dealing with Vietnam, and it wasn't just in the 70s, even in the 60s. Civil rights protests, Roe versus Wade decision in 1973 divided the country. Watergate, all that political stuff going on. And in my own life, a little bit turbulent. I was in the early 70s, finishing up high school, and just narrowly missed the draft for the armed services. They were just stopped taking draft numbers. No, I got a very low number and thought, okay, I guess I'm going. And then it turns out they stopped taking numbers that year. So I went off to college, a middle-class baby boomer kid, and got through some of that turbulence, but it's actually the very first night away from home at school, I got an encounter with an InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and which led to my understanding and giving my life to the Lord as a commitment that I think I've stayed with pretty faithfully throughout the last 50 years, pretty much 50 years. Well, 1974 had a particular development going on. Halfway through college, I was taking chemistry and sciences and was supposed to be pre-med student, just like about everybody else at the college at that time. And I decided I did not want to be part of that rat race. And I noticed a little recruiting flyer that said, join the nuclear Navy and see the world. And somehow that just hit me as something I wanted to do. And also they were paying a 2-year scholarship to help me finish up college, which seemed pretty good. The other thing going on, because of the politics, Jimmy Carter was announcing his candidacy for the presidency. And he wrote a book, Why Not the Best, that I read and I found kind of inspiring. I found it interested in his candidacy. He seemed like a charismatic kind of option. And he had a way of saying how he was a Christian, a peanut farmer. I don't know if those words come back to you. A nuclear engineer, and he was the governor of Georgia and all of that. And I was just kind of ticking that off. He said, well, I'm going in the nuclear Navy, and I'm not a peanut farmer. I'm not well, I'm going to be a nuclear engineer, but I beat him on one. I was an Eagle Scout, and he only made it as far as Star. Now, part of the book, where the title of that book comes from, in his interview for the nuclear Navy, he had to go before Admiral Rickover. If you don't know the fella, he's the stern-looking guy up at the top there. He's actually kind of amused in this picture, which is very rare. He was a Jewish man. He went to the Naval Academy, and he suffered tremendous amounts of hazing and discrimination during his 4 years as a naval midshipman candidate. So, but a very brilliant man. He is credited with starting the nuclear Navy, and part of that, the success of that over the decades, has been his very strong personality. Of course, he's now dead, but part of the reason for the success of the nuclear program, he assured Congress he would personally interview every officer in the program. And Carter was one of those. Now, there were many infamous stories about candidates going before him, and he would rake them over the coals. Notorious stories about locking these candidates in closets for several hours just to humiliate them and so forth, and to see how they behaved. And maybe to retaliate a little bit. But when Carter wrote his book, he apparently sat and talked to Rickover for several hours. And at one point, Rickover asked him about his grades. And Carter said, well, sir, I got some B's and I got some C's. And he seemed kind of proud of himself. And Rickover looked at him sternly and said, well, did you do your best? And Carter said, well, sir, no, I guess not. And hence the title. So the amusing picture there, I guess, that's probably one of the few times you might have seen Rickover close to smiling. He must have told a joke at Carter's expense. in the background, it looks like they're at a commissioning of a submarine, and Carter seemed to enjoy the joke, and we get a slight smile out of Rickover. Well, I went January of '76 for my interview. It was much different than the classic ones. I sat down at his desk. He's buried in paperwork. I'm talking about Rickover, looking down, doing all the Admiral stuff and ignoring me completely. Finally, I hear this little voice saying, "Why do you want the program?" And I started to answer, and he just erupted at me, screaming obscenities and anything he could do. He's trying to get a reaction out of me, and I just kind of looked at him and waited for him to finish up. And I tried to give him an answer. He says, "Get out." So I left, and turns out I had passed. And then that begins the rest of the story here. After graduating, you spend a whole year in an intensive engineering training program, and then you're supposed to go to your first ship assignment. Now, a lot of my career, even that decision not to be a med student, was inspired, or it just seems to mimic the Robert Frost poem. Do you know that? Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Yep. Got one at least. Okay.
I took the one less traveled.
Yeah, I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So while most of the officers are going off to their first ship, I volunteered. One thing you're not supposed to do in the military, right, is that they needed officers to go down to Newport News Shipyard to help with the reactor plant testing programs for this new ship they're building, the Mississippi. And I raised my hand and said, yeah, that sounded like something interesting to do. And you become known as a plank owner. That's a tradition in the Navy if you're part of the first crew of a ship. It's just a little thing, a distinction, get a certificate and a little souvenir and so forth. But the pride of saying, I helped put that ship together and put it out to sea. And that was about 1979. All right. So a very fascinating experience, by the way. Some of this comes back to me in remembering smells and odors, kind of like we were having a conversation over here about taste buds and things. The shipyard environment, if you can imagine, first of all, you're in a brackish water area, right? And so you're getting that swampy sea smell, but then also all of the welding and the grinding and the different types of industrial smells that you get that kind of stayed with me. But the education and the experience was quite something else. You learn, let me go back to that. You learn awful lot about the every compartment, every nut and bolt on the ship. And the little ironic story here is, despite all my sophisticated training in nuclear propulsion, my first job on the ship was to learn and master the ship's sewage system. All the pipes and the pumps and the choppers and things. So somebody had to do it. And being a junior officer, that stuff flows downhill, as they say, and I got that particular job. Well, the ship I guess we got some slight glitchy problems going on here. The ship came up for commissioning, and Carter and Rickover came to town to help celebrate that. So I just was making the point that our paths kind of crossed once again. We're standing at attention on deck, and Carter and Rickover walked by, and not that I had anything to interact with or say to them, but it just seemed like a special moment. 1978 in August. Now,
Just keep going, Bruce.
yeah, all right, we'll do. I like to think of the nuclear Navy as the elite service. I'm trying to get that to advance. That's not working either.
Try to advance.
There's supposed to be a picture of of 6 ships in formation here on the screen. They were the 6 nuclear cruisers that are part of the Navy at that time. And what's the picture is of the ships steaming in formation down in the Caribbean for one of these photo op things. And the point of the picture for me is I like to consider the surface Navy as the elite service. Some submariners would argue that, you know, the Secret Service and the subs were, there it is, they were the special service. But the point I like about this, kind of like that Robert Frost theme, is that we got to get out of the engine room by the end of the day and get up topside and enjoy the sea and the sunset and all of that kind of good stuff. So here it is. Other parts of the military, when you have a parade, at least you're marching around for somebody's benefit. But for us, there's nobody out there to see what we're doing except one helicopter and a Navy photographer to snap the picture. And we weren't even allowed to see it. We had to stay below deck so we didn't spoil the picture. But that's kind of stuff we tended to do here. And yeah, it's still slow in responding.
Try the down arrow.
If I do that, am I going to regret that?
You know what? Let's do this.
Okay.
Stop it and restart it.
Okay. Well, the next picture, there we go.
Try to advance. Let's try to do an
A
advance.
little bit. There we go.
Okay.
So there's a picture. We're in that formation with 6 ships steaming around, and I took a picture of my own ship, and you might wonder how I managed to do that. You don't have a long arm like they do for selfies these days. But I was actually on the next ship that I got assigned to. What happened is toward the end of the first tour, you trained for your next certification. I had to go back to Washington and interview with Rickover's people to get the next level of credential, which is the engineering qualification. It's kind of comparable to the senior reactor operators like at 3 Mile Island and those. And toward the end of the year, there's the new ship, the California, the 36. On my way being transferred to this ship, I had gotten married, by the way, a year before that, and we had a child on the way. The California was out in the Mediterranean, and I'm assigned to go out there, so that they allowed me to stay home for 2 weeks for the baby to be born, which all happened nicely, and then I'm on my way out to meet the Nimitz deployment group out in the Mediterranean. Now, the Mediterranean cruise is a pretty exciting or a pretty preferential kind of deployment for people because you get to steam around to the different ports, which I don't know if you've traveled Europe or any of those places, but there's quite a lot of opportunity there between Italy and Spain and Greece and even parts of North Africa. And they'd been in there for about 5 months, and I joined them. And it was supposed to be a 1-month thing to finish up that, and I get to come back home to my wife and the brand new baby, right? And we actually did. I met them in Rome and got down to Naples there, and the ship got underway and went over to Spain. So I did have one experience there. We landed in Cartagena, Spain, and a couple of us got to go inland over to Granada and visited the Alhambra Castle, a Moorish castle. So that's meant to be when they say join the Navy and see the world, some of the exotic stuff you get to do. So, any Navy people that did go on deployment? Okay. Well, the problem is now is we're enjoying this little port visit. 2 months earlier, in November of '79, the Iranians had seized the hostages in the embassy in Tehran, 52 hostages, and the Pacific Fleet had been sent over in the Indian Ocean to kind of steam around off the coast to try to intimidate Iran into behaving themselves. And they had been overextended, so now they said it's time, let's send the Nimitz fleet over to relieve them. And part of the reason for that is that the Nimitz, if you're familiar with it, it was really considered the flagship aircraft carrier of the United States at the time. Nuclear power, huge ship, appeared in a number of Hollywood movies that you probably might remember seeing some of those. And they figured, why not send the Nimitz over there? So here we are up in the Mediterranean. We figure, okay, we're going to go down through the Suez and get over there fairly quickly. The problem is the State Department was unable to convince Egypt to allow nuclear-powered ships to go through the Suez Canal. So they said, well, hike up your socks and get going. We had to go full power, steaming all the way around the continent of Africa, which took about 3 weeks at full power, 15,000 miles, give or take, which worked pretty well until just about up here on the last couple days, our ship had a little problem. I was the engineering assistant. I'm going across the mess decks one morning to visit number 1 engine room to see what's going on, and all of a sudden the sound of turbines winding down, the lights flicker, and I'm thinking, this going bad too, I guess. Yeah, it was kind of like that. We had a power failure. Go with it, right? That was intentional, I'm sure. So I'm reaching for the door to the engine room to go in and see what's going on, and the door bursts open, and this cloud of steam comes out, and this very nervous-looking machinist mate running for his life. And I said, uh-oh. So it wasn't that bad. I went down in to see what was going on, and we had suffered a low-pressure steam rupture, which caused some problems, took out some equipment. We had to spend a few days recovering from that, which we did because we're Navy, right? Go Navy. And we got up to our duty station here, and they happen to call it Gonzo Station. Can you imagine why? There's 2 reasons, really. They love inventing acronyms. So this stood for Gulf of Oman Naval Zone of Operations. But the real reason is late 70s, the Muppets were a thing, and it just seemed like morale and all of that stuff. So we got to steam around Gonzo Station for quite a while. And we get there, we have to relieve the other battle groups, as they call them, the Midway Carrier Group and the Kitty Hawk. Those are both conventionally powered fleets. And we being nuclear, we're here to save the day. The Nimitz, the California, Texas, and a few other ships there. Now, what do you do when the military has a change of command? You have a parade, right? So we put all the ships in formation and steam around, just like the old World War II newsreels, like, what was that? It's left me now, but Victory at Sea. Anybody remember seeing those things in the old days? And we did that. They took the pictures, again, all for the benefit of one Navy photographer up in a helicopter. And then those guys go home, and we're left here steaming around Gonzo Station. I inserted this in the last time I presented this, just to emphasize what we were doing there off the coast, because we were really too far away from Tehran to do anything as a naval unit. But the whole mission of the Navy, even today, is to project sea power. We know where the United States is over here, but every bit of blue, whether it's light or dark blue, there is our playground or our mission field, if you want to call it that. The light blue is the open ocean. The dark blue are about 12 miles to 200 miles away from the coastline that nations declare as their economic zones, but they're still international waters. Anything within 12 miles is proprietary to that particular nation. And our job is to be there, to be available to help protect the international laws, maritime laws for maintaining open seas. So in this case, we're in this little region of the Indian Ocean. And I'm going to mention something about that toward the end here. And to project sea power, not only did we have all of the ships, but the aircraft, which are kind of like the tip of the spear, because they can extend the effective range of the fleet by several hundred miles when they're out patrolling. And also we have submarines. They were the Secret Service, so we didn't really ever see them or know for sure where they were, but we were told that we had several submarines attached, providing us underwater protection. And usually this is for defense against the Russian Navy, which at the time really had no dog in this particular fight with Iran. So we weren't that concerned about that, but it's still part of the operating profile of the Navy. So there we were, another post photo shoot, but this is not how a daily day in the life looked for us. You would not steam that close together because you probably have a risk of colliding, first of all, or you make too big a target for the Navy, for the enemy, and you'd just be more effective if you spread your assets out. So what a real day in the life looked like is the escort ships would be out on a perimeter of about 10 miles. Just providing, like in basketball, a zone defense for the aircraft carrier. So a real day in the life looks like something like this, a lot of open water, open sky. You'd be lucky if you see a ship. You might see one ship on this picture if you're looking close. Off on the right on the horizon there, that I think was the Texas. And that's pretty much what life was like day in and day out. We ended up, remember, this was the last month of our deployment, and off we're going to a new zone of operations. And it turns out we spent another 4 or 5 months out there, which was record-breaking time away from sea. In fact, we even got a t-shirt for it. It was called the Gulf of Oman Surf Club. I kept that t-shirt for a long time, but it's since seen better days. But we had record-breaking days at sea. I'll mention something about that in a minute, just back and forth. One day, finally, we had a little break in the action. There's Karachi, Pakistan over there. There was a commercial freighter that caught fire out in the ocean area, and we were tasked to go over and lend assistance. They had lost propulsion power. So we towed them into port. And I mentioned my sense of smell memory here. Karachi is a unique place, and I joked with Steve here that here in Pennsylvania we have a pretty common occurrence. You can walk outdoors like I did this morning and know that the local farmer has already been up spreading the manure on the field, right? And I'm not from this area per se, and I'm not offended by that. I kind of like knowing that the farmers are out there getting the job done. But Karachi is not like that. A whole different kind of smell, and the water was brown and polluted. And we towed that ship into port and got away as fast as we could. It just was not a pleasant environmental experience. The other thing we did, other than just steaming back and forth, is the Strait of Hormuz is this little elbow right here that isolates the Persian Gulf from the rest of that arm of the Indian Ocean. And that's a choke point. That can be a dangerous area. A lot of shipping goes through there, and more recently there have been problems there. And we would run up in there just to try to exercise our right to do so, but also in case we were needing to do that for this mission that we didn't yet know about. Now, the threat that we understood was that Iran, this is Iran right here, had patrol boats, fast-moving boats, and what were they called? Chinese silkworm missiles. So they were perceived as a threat. They could zoom in here under the radar and fire those missiles off at a range that could do some serious damage to us. We trained for that eventuality. never happened to us. The USS Stark, a few years later, did have a problem. You remember the Stark incident? Actually, Iraqi airplanes launched some Exocet missiles and killed 37 of our shipmates. And some days we got to do this, we just practice things that we do, and this was a practice missile. I mean, once it's expended like that, it's gone, but it gives us the training exercise of tracking a simulated target and going through all the motions. And other days, although the Indian Ocean is warm and relatively calm, you get some weather, and that's Navy guys like this. I don't know if you can identify with that, but get that deck pitching under your feet and the spray blowing you off your feet and all of that. It just, you got to have some excitement, right? Finally, many days at sea, we were breaking records for days away from port. So many that it was pretty much days that we didn't even see land. And the Navy broke its tradition. There was a long-standing rule that you don't have alcohol on a ship. But they finally, to give us a morale day, they flew in pallets of beer and steaks. And we had cookouts on the back end of the ship called the fantail, and just had a party there. And all the airplanes off the aircraft carrier came and gave this mind-blowing air show with the F-14s swooping down, beating anything that the Blue Angels would ever do. And then the bomber planes would come in and drop stuff in our wake, making these big explosions and things. So it was fun at the time. So. Now, I know you must be bored by now, right? I mean, that's the whole point of all this buildup, is a lot of your days at sea are boring, but it finally became apparent that something was developing in terms of this Iranian thing. And unbeknownst to us, really from almost the first month that the hostages had been taken, there were mission planning going on in the western deserts of our country. We didn't have all the special ops forces that we have now, but Charlie Beckwith was leading up a team of what was known then as the Delta Force, and getting ready, practicing missions, and they had helicopters out in the desert doing stuff. And here we are out in the ocean. Our captain had been flown over to the aircraft carrier a couple of times for secret briefings with the admiral to, get insights into what was going on and what our mission was going to be. We had no idea why he was going over, or what he couldn't talk to us about it. The aircraft carrier was in what was called operational quarantine, so we weren't even supposed to be close enough to see the carrier to know what was going on. And what was going on is they had the squadron of 8 RH-53D Sea Stallion minesweeping helicopters that they were preparing. They painted them special desert brown, as you can see here, and were stripping all the extra equipment off of the helicopter to reduce its weight, which would extend its flight radius. And those guys were getting ready. And one evening, normally I'd stand watch or supervise watches in the engine spaces, but as a surface warfare officer, I also stood watch on the bridge. And I happened to be on the bridge standing watch the evening of April 24th. By the way, this picture is still daylight, obviously, and just a stock photo of those helicopters, but to give you the sense of what was going on. It's dark now, and I'm looking at this radar scope in front of me, and I see a cloud of 8 blips appear over the aircraft carrier and start moving away towards land. I said, boy, that looks interesting. And I reported that to the captain, and he gets on the ship's announcing system, kind of like this, and he lets the whole ship know, okay, folks, we're getting ready for a special mission. He said, I can't tell you right now, but he promised that in 24 hours, he'd give us all the information, and we would be very proud to be serving in the U.S. Navy. So, wow, that's exciting. So we did. Thought that was pretty cool that we were going to do something after all these days of just being at sea. So I'm going to give you the unclassified mission brief. I guess most of it's unclassified anyway now because the Joint Chiefs published this in a report. But what was going on, here's Gulf of Oman, or Gonzo Station down here. And by the way, the point is, this is about 800 miles up to Tehran, which is why we didn't think we could ever do anything, because the range of our airplanes is only several hundred miles, let alone the helicopters. But here's the plan. We're going to launch the helicopters. They're going to fly that night up to Desert 1 out there. The next night, they'd be going on to Desert 2. But in the meantime, they have to rendezvous here this first night with a 6 C-130 airplanes. Those are from the Air Force, Steve served. They were down here in Oman, so they flew up. 3 of those airplanes had these fuel bladders in them that were going to provide enough fuel to refuel the helicopters. The other 3 airplanes had the Delta Force, the special operations soldiers. So they would rendezvous here, refuel the helicopters, get ready for the next night, which they would fly into basically just the outskirts of Tehran at a place called Desert 2. CIA was on the ground. They are going to provide transportation. So once the soldiers are here, they transport everybody into Tehran where they're going to do the rescue mission. And Army Rangers were getting dropped into Tehran to take the airport. So when the hostages were rescued, they'd all get transported to the Tehran airport, and C-141 transport planes were going to fly them all back home. So, and of course, that's not what happened, right? If you're familiar with some of the details. That's what happened. What happened was on the way to Desert 1, there was a haboob, which is a huge dust storm. Some of these more modern TV movies, you see this big cloud of dust threatening, moving at you in the dust storm, and that was literally what they experienced. One of the helicopters got disoriented and turned around and came back to the aircraft carrier. Another one in the storm was suffering a cracked rotor blade, and they landed somewhere down in here, transferred the crew, they abandoned the helicopter. And then on the way to Desert 1, when they landed, I forget, they all had these names, Blackbeard 1, 2, 3, and 4. One of them, on landing, had a little red light, an alarm saying it had a hydraulics failure. So they knew they had to investigate, and it was a real problem. Charlie Beckwith was all over their case trying to get them to fix it, and that was not repairable. And Beckwith was quite adamant, I cannot do this mission with 5 helicopters. They only needed 6, but they sent 8 because that was 2 installed spares. So that was not a happy moment right then, but they satellite phoned back to the White House and explained, we're down to 5 helicopters, we recommend aborting the mission. And Carter and his staff have to chew on that for a while and agreed, okay, too bad, abort. So in the process of aborting, they still had to refuel the helicopters to get them out there, and in the dust storm there, one of the helicopters was positioning itself next to the refueling plane, and it ended up flipping over on top of the other plane. It caused a great explosion. You see the aftermath of that, and in that we lost 8 crewmen, 3 Marines on the helicopter, and 5 Air Force guys on the C-130.
So they had to do it in the air. They had to refuel in the air? Or?
I think he had to, they had to move around close to the airplane.
The bladders was on the back end of the cargo door, or the ramp, and that's where they then took the hoses over to the.
Yeah.
So they were flying when they did this, or the?
Well, he had to put enough power on to move the helicopter close to where it needed to be refueled, and somehow with the wind and everything, he did one of those. Unfortunate. So we attempted this rescue, of course, and unfortunately, in the process, became quite an embarrassment to Carter and the whole nation, really. That next night, the captain came on the announcing system. I was on the watch down in the engine room this time, and I heard, attention all hands, and the captain's voice comes on and explained basically in very short terms what happened and the fact that we had 8 servicemen die in the attempt. And we still didn't have all the details I just told you at that point. We just knew that we failed and some guys died. And it wasn't a happy moment. And I know with the news broadcast at home, everybody at home knew a whole lot more about it than we did. And my wife even mentioned, they were kind of worried about us now because there we had attempted something and exposed ourselves and might be open to retaliation. There is a monument in Arlington honoring the 8 servicemen. As I said, 3 Marines from the helicopter crew and 5 airmen from the transport plane, and they have names. And so when I presented this presentation at one of the Memorial Day observances, it was an appropriate way to remember the cost of serving our country, even in peacetime, as we called it. Well, within a few weeks or even a few days, the Nimitz group was told, okay, go home. We'll put another aircraft group out here, and we were on our way back to Norfolk. Carter was a good leader. He wanted to make sure we received recognition for all that we did. We were just thrilled at this point to be going home into what we might learn. I was one of the ones that got sent home early. This isn't an actual photo of that, but give you a sense of the operations on a smaller ship. This is how you got transported around. A helicopter comes by and you get picked up, and I got sent over to the aircraft carrier for a transfer to Diego Garcia, where we boarded a transport plane to fly home. You ever hear of Diego Garcia? Small island, actually in the southern hemisphere, down here south of India. And the U.S. and Britain operate a military facility there for the very purpose of having the ability to operate in the Indian Ocean. Actually, there's some international thing where its ownership is being transferred to Mauritius. But it really does. If you like the Tom Hanks movie Castaway, it has some of that look there with Wilson laying, that's the ball, right? So, and not only a t-shirt, but we got this nice memento map to remember our whole deployment by, and it showed all these routes that the ship had taken. So they're going all the way back over around Africa and again all the way home to Norfolk. But several of us got flown home early through Kenya and Rota, Spain. They have to refuel the plane, but we got home early a week or two to help plan the arrival party. And this is what the homecoming party looked like that day in Norfolk. The ships steaming around the corner here in Hampton Roads to end up at the piers over here. Tugboats celebrating with their sprays and everything. And there was some live TV coverage you can still see on YouTube these days, thanks to the miracle of YouTube, remembering that day. And Carter was there to greet us. Remember, this is partly a tribute to Carter, this presentation. And I put some dates up here to try to wrap up the story now. In November, we had the party here, but that was in May. By November, Carter was losing the election Reagan came in, being inaugurated in January of '81. And at that point, I think enough had been said that the Iranians knew they better release the hostages, and they held out just to snub Jimmy Carter to the day that Reagan was taking office. So Carter goes over to Wiesbaden, Germany to welcome the hostages as they're being released. March 1981, California, the ship I'm on, we're already being redeployed back to the Indian Ocean. So one more, the life in the peacetime Navy doesn't end. And December 24, that's just 6 months ago, Jimmy Carter had died. Just to briefly, my career didn't end then. I went on, actually at shore duty at IBM, we were working on the next generation of shipboard helicopters, and I got to participate in this program. It's an exciting environment when the ship is pitching back and forth in rough seas and you have to do helicopter operations. There's this little sled right here. The new idea was when this helicopter gets close enough, you put a tether up there and actually winch it right down on the deck and land that sucker. And apparently it's working. The SH-60, you might know that by other names. Just about every service and the military, the CIA and all those folks all have found this airframe to be very useful over the last few years. And I want to wrap up with this idea. Sea power, as I told you before, still matters. And when I last gave this presentation just a month ago, the hot story was Yemen's Houthis, the rebels, were attacking shipping in the Red Sea. And we had Navy ships there to exercise our rights to keep the seas open for shipping and so forth. There was a lot of incidents with those attacks, and it seems like that quieted down quite a bit. There was quite a dramatic bombing of their facilities, and wouldn't you know, though, even today we hear Iran in the news with Israel attacking and suppressing their nuclear development hopes. So Iran back in 1979 and really now for at least 4+ decades continuing to be a concern. The Nimitz, by the way, last month was deployed to the South China Sea because I think it was the Truman that was being sent over to the Red Sea for those operations. And there's a way to summarize what sea power is all about. We're protecting U.S. naval power, supporting our allies, ensuring freedom of navigation, and in that particular case, deter Chinese aggressiveness in the South China Sea. And another little fact might be interesting, the Nimitz will be decommissioned next year after 51 years. If you want to read more, Wilkinson's book is interesting. That's this one operation, Eagle Claw. Kyle wrote a book, The Guts to Try. I mean, Carter suffered a lot of criticism, he and his staff, for trying that operation because it seemed like it had a lot of moving parts to it and not a great chance of success. And Carter at one point was asked if he had any regrets, and he said, I wished I'd sent 9 helicopters. And I wonder how that would have happened if that mission had succeeded. What would the nation and the world look like today? Maybe a whole different dynamic in the Middle East, and we wouldn't have had Desert Storm 1 and 2. We would maybe not have had 9/11 and some of the other things we experience today. If you allow me to close with this, I just want to point to Jimmy Carter and give him some tribute here. Although he was criticized often for his presidency, we admire many of his achievements, most of them maybe after his presidency over the last few decades. You Habitat for Humanity. He was active in his church with Bible studies, and even a mediator of peace with Egypt and other, what was the other country there, but Anwar Sadat and with Israel. And I like to think of it this way. He demonstrated by his life the joy of the abundant Christian life, the life Jesus promised all of us. And he was in a position where he could exercise that. He could exercise that, and he could be a witness to the hope that he had within him. So I think that's where I'll leave it. So I want to thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, but thank you.
Trying to trip you up.
Yep.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. That was really enlightening. I remember as a young man following those news events, so now I have a bigger picture of that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
you're welcome.
Anything else for the good of the club? If not, everybody enjoy your weekend.
Oh, no.